The gymnasium was humming with noise. A mass of bodies sat in metal bleachers, clapping and shouting, their voices echoing against the concrete walls and high windows. The air was sharp with the smell of sweat and chalk, and fluorescent lights beat down like interrogation lamps. On the center mat, two competitors circled one another, a flurry of fists, a blur of feet, and the referee blew his whistle as the round ended. People leaned forward, eager for the next match. But when the announcer's voice crackled over the speaker and said, "Next challenger, Emi Takeda," the crowd hesitated. A child stepped forward from the edge of the mat. She couldn't have been more than 9. 4 foot nothing, small frame, dark eyes hidden beneath long bangs, and a pink ribbon tied clumsily around her ponytail. She wore a loose white GI that looked borrowed, slightly too big for a frame, and moved with deliberate, quiet grace. Her sandals tapped lightly against the floor as she approached the center. The gym fell into a strange silence. Then a wave of laughter erupted. Someone said, "This a joke?" Another snorted. She lost her way to the daycare. Even the referee blinked and looked toward the announcer's table, unsure. But across from her, the opponent stood, tall, sculpted, confident, a black belt wrapped tight around his waist, shoulders relaxed, hands loose. He smiled a half smile and shook his head in disbelief. "Is she even old enough to be here?" he muttered to the official. Emi stood quietly, waiting. She bowed once, deep and respectful. The crowd kept laughing. No one knew who she was. No one saw what she carried inside. But Emi wasn't here to prove anything. She was here because of a promise. 2 years ago, her life had been a different world. Okinawa summers were warm and wide, the skies stretching endlessly over fields of sugarcane and whispering pines. Emi had once lived there, in a wooden house on the outskirts of a quiet village, with her mother and father. Her father was a schoolteacher. Her mother ran a small flower shop. Then came the accident. One wet morning, one wrong turn, and the world shattered in a single moment of screeching tires and bending metal. Emi didn't speak for weeks after that. Her voice curled up inside her, unreachable. She went to live with her grandfather, Masaru Takeda, a man with a weathered face and hands that could still break bricks at 70. A legend in his time. He had run a modest dojo for decades, teaching traditional Ryukyu martial arts. Not for sport, but for spirit. At first, he didn't speak much either. He made her rice in the mornings, watered the plants, sat by the window with tea, and stared at the trees. One evening, after dinner, she followed him outside. The moon hung low, casting silver across the stone courtyard. He didn't say a word, just began his forms, slow, precise movements that cut through the air like brushstrokes on parchment. Emi watched, silent, breath held. The next night, he handed her a wooden staff. "You can hold it if you're quiet." That's how it started. No big speech. No promises. Just motion. Rhythm. A way to fill the silence. They trained under moonlight. She was a quick learner. Sharp, focused, light on her feet. Her size, once her weakness, became her edge. She moved like water, never meeting force with force. Masaru would nod quietly, adjusting her stance, never praising, never pushing. "You don't need strength," he told her once. "You need stillness. When the world is loud, be quiet. When they expect to shout, whisper." At school, things weren't as peaceful. Emi's silence made her a target. Kids mocked her. One boy tried to trip her in the hall. She didn't respond, didn't cry. But that night, her grip on the staff was tighter than usual. Masaru saw it. He stood beside her and whispered, "The world will not understand you. That's not your problem. But one day it will see you, and it will listen." 2 years passed like that, nights of practice, days of silence. She never entered a tournament, never showed her skills. Until that morning, Masaru handed her a folded GI. "There's a regional meet in the city. Open mat at the end. You could challenge someone, if you want to." He didn't say more. Didn't need to. Emi nodded once. Now, she stood in the middle of a gym she'd never seen before, under the gaze of hundreds of strangers, across from a black belt who thought she was a joke. The announcer glanced at the referee. He hesitated, then blew the whistle. The match began. The black belt smiled as he stepped forward, loose and relaxed. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He just thought this would be funny. Maybe he'd tap her shoulder, spin her around a little, give the crowd something to laugh about. Emmy didn't move. Her hands were open, her eyes unblinking. The moment stretched. Then he lunged. His foot shot forward in a slow, careful sweep meant to trip her. Harmless, almost playful. She stepped aside. Effortless. The crowd chuckled. He tried again, this time a low punch tore her ribs. She dropped her body, slipping beneath his arm, spinning lightly away. No strike, no counter, just silence. The laughter faded. A few people leaned in. He frowned. This time, he moved faster. 3 steps, a real strike. Emmy ducked, pivoted, touched the floor with one hand, and swept his back leg with the other. He stumbled. There was an audible gasp. The referee stepped forward, hand raised, but the black belt waved him off. He was annoyed now. He rushed her with a sharp punch. Emmy turned sideways, catching his momentum with both palms and redirecting it. He spun off balance. Emmy didn't follow. The crowd was silent now. No one knew her name. No one laughed anymore. And as Emmy stood in the center of the mat, breathing calmly, eyes fixed, she heard her grandfather's words echo in her mind. Be quiet when the world expects noise. The bell rang for the round to end. The referee signaled a pause. The crowd erupted, not with laughter, but applause, confused, surprised, respectful. Emmy bowed again, never speaking. She turned to walk off the mat, but behind her, the black belt straightened up. He didn't smile this time. He nodded, and beneath the lights of that crowded gym, the quietest girl had just become impossible to ignore. The second round was moments away. The referee stood between them, holding one arm out to each side. Emmy's opponent, Takashi Arita, rolled his shoulders with practiced ease, his expression no longer amused. Something in his face had changed. The grin was gone, replaced by a narrowed stare, a thin line between irritation and curiosity. Across from him, Emmy waited silently, her arms relaxed at her sides, her feet placed with precision. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. Her ribbon fluttered slightly as the ceiling fan pushed hot air around the gymnasium. The referee dropped his arms. Begin! Takashi didn't move immediately this time. He had the build of a seasoned competitor. Broad chest, powerful legs, confident stance. But now, hesitation crept into his rhythm. The memory of stumbling back in the first round tugged at his pride. He was 20 years old, a black belt, and regional champion in his division. Losing not just to a child, but in front of this crowd, was unthinkable. He stepped in carefully, feinting right, then launching a sharp hook aimed at her left side. It was a test, nothing reckless. Emmy shifted her weight, turning with the strike. His fist sliced air. She moved not with speed, but with anticipation, as if she'd already seen him coming. She didn't counter. Takashi growled under his breath. He came at her faster. 2 quick jabs followed by a spinning kick. It was fast, well-practiced, and meant to end the round early. Emmy ducked low, her knee touching the mat, letting the kick pass over her. In a flash, she rolled sideways, popped back up, and reset her stance. Her eyes never left him. Now the crowd was no longer simply watching. They were witnessing. Something about the way she moved was unlike anything they'd seen from a child. It was calm, not explosive. Measured, not erratic. She wasn't fighting to win. She was simply present. A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Phones were out. The whispers grew. Who is she? In the corner, Masaru Takeda watched with the stillness of stone. His hands rested on the cane across his knees, but his knuckles were tight. Emmy didn't know, but his heart pounded beneath his robe, not from fear, from memory. Years ago, he had watched her mother move the same way, elegant, quiet, unshakable. She had never fought in tournaments either, but her strength had always been silent, like rain soaking into the earth. Emmy was her daughter, through and through. Back on the mat, Takashi was sweating now. He hadn't landed a single strike. He shouted and charged forward. His hands blurred. Punch, punch, elbow, knee. A fury of practice violence. Emmy retreated with precision, pivoting, turning, redirecting. Not a single blow connected. She waited for one misstep, just one, and there it was, a fraction too far forward on his left foot. She slid her right leg behind his and twisted at the waist. He fell. Not hard, but fast. The kind of fall that erodes confidence more than pride. The gym held its breath. Takashi slapped the mat, rolled, and bounced back to his feet. He turned toward the referee. Is this even legal? The referee lifted a hand. Fight! Takashi clenched his jaw. He looked at her again, not as a joke, not as an accident, but as an opponent, a real one. He nodded once. It was an apology. It was acceptance. Emmy bowed. Takashi adjusted his stance. His next move was cleaner. A high kick aimed at her collarbone. Emmy stepped in, close enough to neutralize the arc, and raised both arms. She didn't block. She guided. His leg swung past her, and she tapped a supporting knee with the edge of her foot. He dropped to one knee, gasped again. Still, Emmy didn't strike. She stepped back, reset her posture, invited him up. In that pause, something shifted between them. Takashi stood again, slower now. He was breathing heavily. Emmy wasn't. She hadn't thrown a punch. Not one. But everyone watching understood. She was in control. A flashback surfaced in her mind. Rain on rooftops. Her grandfather's voice. Control is not about domination. It is about stillness when chaos arrives. She remembered the time a boy had shoved her in school and laughed when she fell. Her classmates had laughed too. She hadn't cried. She had waited. And that night, she trained harder than ever, her foot sweeping imaginary opponents under Okinawan stars. Takashi circled now, no longer rushing. He tried to feint, lure her. She didn't bite. He lunged again, this time aiming low. Emmy turned into momentum, catching his arm mid-swing and locking it against her shoulder. The move was precise, deliberate. She bent, flipped him over her back in one motion, and Takashi hit the mat with a thud. It wasn't violence. It was art. A moment of stunned silence followed. Emmy stepped away again. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She simply bowed once more. Takashi didn't rise right away. He lay there for a second, looking up at the rafters. His chest rose and fell. And then, slowly he sat up. The referee stepped in. Point awarded. The scoreboard ticked. Emmy was leading. The crowd had shifted now, no longer dismissive, no longer amused. They were leaning forward, hanging on to every move, every breath. A young girl near the front clutched her father's sleeve. She's amazing, she whispered. Back near the entrance, a reporter nudged his cameraman. Get this, she's making him look like a beginner. And yet, Emmy's face remained unchanged. She wasn't here for the crowd. She wasn't here for victory. She was here for something else. In a quiet moment between rounds, Takashi stood and looked directly at her. For the first time, he didn't see a child. He didn't see a fluke. He saw a martial artist. And for the first time, he bowed, not perfunctorily, but deeply with sincerity. Emmy returned the bow. The referee raised his hand again. Final round. The gym was dead silent. No more laughter. No more disbelief. Only anticipation. The little girl no one took seriously had become the fighter no one could ignore. And the real test of strength, of character, of spirit was still to come. The final round began without warning. One word from the referee, begin, and the air in the gym shifted. It was no longer a match. It was a reckoning. Takashi's breath was uneven. Sweat clung to his temple. He had entered the ring expecting to amuse the crowd, maybe offer a playful lesson to an eager kid. But now, everything he thought he knew about skill, size, and seriousness had unraveled. Emi Takeda stood across from him like a quiet mirror, reflecting not just his movements but the gaps in his discipline. He charged. This time, not with arrogance but urgency. His first move was clean, an inside crescent kick, followed by a direct elbow. It was quick, practiced, and lethal in competition. Emmy didn't retreat. She stepped into a strike, letting the momentum slide past her shoulder, catching his elbow with both hands and twisting. Not enough to injure, just to disrupt. Takashi stumbled. She didn't press forward. She let him reset. The crowd was silent again, the kind of silence born from awe. Emmy moved like a shadow, never still, but never loud. Every step she took seemed chosen by a wiser version of herself. She made no sounds. Her breathing was invisible. She didn't look at the crowd. She never once sought their approval. Takashi adjusted his footing. He felt every muscle tighten. He was strong, yes, but strength felt useless when your opponent couldn't be reached. He threw another punch, this time with full commitment. Emmy ducked beneath it, pivoted, and sent a sweep toward his ankle. He anticipated it, finally, and leapt back just in time. Their eyes met. A flicker of understanding passed between them. This wasn't a game. It never was. Takashi narrowed his stance. Then, without warning, he launched into a flurry of combinations. A hammer fist, reverse kick, knee strike. He was going all in. Not to win, but to learn. To test himself against whatever power lived in the girl in front of him. One strike landed. A glancing blow to her left side. She staggered back. It was the first time she'd shown pain. Takashi hesitated, unsure whether to continue. Emmy dropped to one knee, palm on the mat. Her body tensed. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, it looked like she might not get up. In the corner, Masaru Takeda didn't move. His eyes didn't blink, but in his chest, the past stirred. He saw his granddaughter, winded and hurting, and he remembered another moment, years ago, when her mother had collapsed in a similar ring. Too exhausted to continue. He had wanted to intervene then, too, but he didn't. She had found her own way up, so he waited now. Emmy closed her eyes. Pain bloomed across her ribs, sharp and hot. She leaned into it, not resisting, not denying, letting it flow. Her grandfather's words echoed. Asterisk, pain is a visitor. You don't fight it. You open the door and you let it leave on its own. Asterisk, she exhaled long and controlled, and then she rose. Takashi saw it immediately, the shift. She wasn't faster. She wasn't stronger. But she was clearer. Her eyes had gone calm, like deep water before a storm. He braced himself. She stepped forward, each motion fluid, almost too smooth to follow. Her feet glided silently over the mat. She didn't attack. She waited. Takashi struck again, this time with a spinning back fist meant to surprise. But Emmy was already inside the arc. Her shoulder slipped under blow, her hands tracing the air like calligraphy, and in one motion, she turned, grabbed his uniform, and twisted his center of gravity. He flew over her hip and landed flat on his back. This time, she didn't step away. She dropped low, knees beside his ribs, and pinned his shoulder to the mat. Her hand hovered near his collarbone, not striking but present, poised, a gesture choice. Takashi froze. He couldn't move. The crowd stared, unbreathing. She had him. The referee glanced, unsure whether to call the match. Then Emmy did something no one expected. She lifted her hand away, slowly, deliberately. She bowed her head, and she stepped off him. Gasps rippled through the gym. Takashi lay still for a moment. He had been beaten, clearly, cleanly, yet she had not taken the point. She had not sought the win. He sat up, looking at her across the mat. Emmy had returned to her stance, composed. The referee stepped between them. Takashi rose to his feet. He walked to the center of the ring, stood before Emmy and bowed. Deeply, with both hands at his side, head lowered. Emmy bowed back. There was no triumph in her face. No smile, no pride, only stillness. Then, something unexpected happened. Takashi turned toward the crowd, stepped to the center, and raised Emmy's hand himself. The applause was immediate. Not the wild cheers of a sports victory, but the slow, swelling sound of people rising to their feet. They weren't clapping for a child who'd won a fight. They were clapping for something older, something rare. The moment pulsed through the room. Teachers watching from the sidelines wiped their eyes. Students turned to each other, stunned. Even the announcer's voice caught as he tried to speak. But no words were needed. In the end, Emmy didn't win with a strike. She won with restraint, with grace, with the choice not to dominate, but to teach. And in that moment, everyone, Takashi, the crowd, her grandfather, understood something that couldn't be explained with medals or belts. True mastery wasn't about defeating your opponent. It was about defeating the need to. Emmy walked off the mat without a trophy, without a speech, and without ever saying a word. But she had spoken more clearly than anyone in that gym, and the world was finally ready to listen. The days following the tournament passed in a quiet blur. News of the mysterious girl who had silenced a black belt spread beyond the gym, across local headlines, martial arts forums, and social media feeds. The footage, grainy but undeniable, captured every moment of her calm deflection, her precision, her mercy. People debated the rules, the implications, her background. But Emmy Takeda remained as silent in the aftermath as she'd been on the mat. She returned home with her grandfather the same way she had left. No fanfare, no interviews, no trophies in hand. Masaru said nothing during the train ride. He simply held a paper bag of steamed buns between them, offering one silently. Emmy took it and ate slowly, chewing each bite with the same calm she had shown during the match. Neither of them looked out the window. There was no need to fill the space between them with words. They understood each other without them. Back in the village, life resumed its gentle rhythm. The same cicadas sang in the trees. The same shopkeepers swept their storefronts at dawn. But something had shifted. Emmy felt it first in the way strangers looked at her on the street. Not with pity or amusement, but with a quiet respect. Children whispered when she walked past. Adults gave soft nods. And once, during a walk to the park, a girl her age stepped forward and asked, very timidly, if Emmy would teach her how to move like that. Emmy said nothing. But the next morning, that girl arrived at the Takeda courtyard with two others. Masaru watched on the porch, arms crossed, as Emmy stood barefoot in the morning light and slowly demonstrated the basic forms. She moved with perfect clarity, each motion drawn from memory, shaped by discipline. The girls copied her awkwardly, giggling at first, but Emmy didn't laugh. She adjusted their stances, repositioned their feet, and began again. The giggles faded. The training began. She didn't call it class. She never scheduled it. But by the end of the week, 8 girls showed up. By the second week, there were 12. Emmy trained them in silence, just as her grandfather had trained her. There were no belts, no certificates, no competition, just practice and patience. Takashi visited a month later. He arrived without notice, bowing respectfully at the gate. He wore civilian clothes, not his GI, and brought a small wooden box as a gift. Masaru answered the door, giving a soft grunt of acknowledgement before letting him in. Emmy was in the back garden, raking leaves into piles. Takashi stood at a distance, unsure how to begin. I came to say thank you, he said finally. Emmy turned, rake still in hand. She didn't speak. I thought I knew everything, he admitted. About winning, about strength. But that day what you did, it undid me in the best way. He offered the box. She took it without question and opened it. Inside was a simple iron pendant on a black cord, shaped like a leaf falling in wind. My sensei gave it to me when I earned my black belt, Takashi said, but I think I needed to learn from someone else before I really understood what it meant. Emmy looked at it, then him. Her gaze was steady. After a moment, she bowed, deeply. Takashi bowed in return. No more words were needed. After he left, Masaru approached. He learned something. That boy, he said. Sometimes the ones who fall hardest are the ones most worth saving. Emmy looked down at the pendant. It was heavier than it appeared. She tied it around her wrist. That autumn, invitations began to arrive. Regional dojos, national organizations. Even a martial arts academy in Tokyo offered her a scholarship. All of them praised her form, her composure, her humility. Some offered prizes. Others asked her to perform, to compete, to be the face of their brand. Masaru laid them out on the table one evening. Dozens of crisp envelopes and printed offers. He looked at her across the tatami mat. It's your choice, he said. But remember, the world is loud, and it will reward you for becoming louder. Emmy thought for a long time before answering. She shook her head. He nodded once. That winter, the village held its annual festival under strings of paper lanterns and fireworks. The same small stage in the town square where children once sang songs was now used for a short martial arts demonstration. When Emmy's name was called, the crowd hushed. She stepped into the lantern light, wearing a plain white GI. Her feet were bare against the wooden stage. She bowed. Then she began. Her performance was not flashy. It was not filled with flips or acrobatics. It was simple, clean, devastatingly precise. Every movement spoke of focus, of discipline, of restraint. Her kata ended with a final bow so low and respectful. Even the elders in the front row found themselves rising to return it. A little girl clapped too loudly and covered her mouth, embarrassed. Emmy turned toward her, smiled gently, and beckoned her forward. The girl hesitated, then ran up the steps. Emmy took her small hands and positioned them into the first stance. The crowd watched as the two stood together in silence under the lanterns. Later that night, Masaru stood at the edge of the festival with his hands behind his back, watching his granddaughter. People passed by, nodding at him, thanking him. He gave no reply. When Emmy finally joined him, he said, "Your mother would have been proud." Emmy looked up at him, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she spoke. "I know." They walked home in the darkness, no longer alone in the world, but still wrapped in silence. This time, a comfortable one. Emmy never returned to competition. She never stepped on another tournament mat. But the dojo grew, not into a business, not into a franchise, but into a legacy. More girls came. A few boys. They trained under the cherry blossoms in spring, in the snow in winter, in the rain without umbrellas. They learned balance, not brawling. They learned when to fight and when not to. Years later, when Emmy herself had become a woman, when her grandfather had passed peacefully in his sleep, the same gymnasium that once laughed at her invited her back, not as a competitor, but as a master. She stood in the center of that familiar mat. The seats were full, and waiting in the front row was a new generation, wide-eyed, hopeful, hungry to learn. Emmy bowed to the room, and without saying a word, began to teach.